So, good afternoon. Access to data and the ability to use it are essential for innovation and growth. Data-driven innovation can bring breakthroughs in personal medicine, in improved urban mobility, in travel safety, in better policy making, and improvements in supply chain, energy efficiency, and even emergency response. Welcome to the Eclipse Dataspace Connector EDC conference. This is the last session. You have covered so far, from what I've heard, the what, the why, and the how. So how to embrace the data economy, the key benefits and concepts, and the changes that are needed. And I have 5 guests in the panel, and we're going to talk about vision. And this is your opportunity to get involved in that. We've prepared some questions. My name again is Cameron. I represent SAP, and it is my pleasure to welcome the 5 guests. I will just go through the 5 guests' names and introduce them. Their names are Boris Otto, Professor for Industrial Information Management at TU Dortmund University, and also Executive Director at Fraunhofer. Thank you, Boris. We also have Uli Homann, Corporate Vice President for Cloud and Artificial Intelligence at Microsoft. Welcome, Uli. We have also Kai Demtröder for BMW, and he represents Gaia-X and can tell us about the data mobility space, Catena-X projects. We also have Sebastian Steinbuss. Sebastian is the CTO at the International Dataspaces Association, and some of you will already know him from some of the sessions that have happened beforehand. And then we also have a new person here. So Patrick Hebant, he is Research and Development Associate Director working with Amadeus and the new Gaia-X platform. Welcome, Patrick. Okay, so there are two parts to this session. The first part, I would just like to have an introduction where Boris provides a little bit of input into why is EDC necessary, and why should we not delay, and some insights into some of the current projects, and that will help us get the other speakers involved. And the second part is really an open panel. We've got some questions. It's open for business. It has real code, and we need to start. And we want to get your vision. So the other 4 participants, we want to get your vision on what's required, what's needed, and how can we create value with EDC. So yeah. Let's start with Boris. Boris, maybe you can just give us a little bit of an input. What is necessary, and why should we not delay? And some insights into some of the current projects.
Yeah, thank you, Cameron, also for the introduction, and thanks for having me in this great panel. I think you mentioned it already. I mean, it's all about, let's say, the data economy. And if we look into this notion of a data economy from a perspective of, let's say, an economic region like the EU, but also, let's say, other places like in the US or so, what we want to achieve is that we, in the end, find a balance between the interest of the individual actor in this economy, for example, someone who has data and wants to provide it to somebody else, and on the other hand, let's say, another party that needs to consume certain pieces of data. So the interest of the individual on the one hand side, and let's say the interest of the community on the other. So in the end, when we talk about a fair data economy, or sometimes I think it was also Angela Merkel who coined this notion of a social data market economy, it's always about balancing the interest of the individual and the rightful interests of the community or the economy as a whole. And when we look into data, that turns out into, let's say, the demand on the one hand side. We need to make as much use of the data available as we can, so which led a couple of years ago to strange requests from some political parties saying that we need to force companies to open up their data because we want to use it. And on the other hand, of course, the legitimate interest of the data provider, because these guys usually have the cost of providing particular high quality data to determine what's happening with their data. So this equilibrium or this balance is one of the fundamental rationales when we talk about, let's say, the data economy. So, and how can we achieve that? So we can achieve that by, let's say, trying to come up with binding rules and legislation. For example, as we see it from the European Commission, but also in other places on this planet, like in China, for example, which is understandable. And I don't want to basically judge this, but I think it would be more wisely, a more wise approach if we, well, come up with technology that allows us to create a fair data economy. And that holds also true because, I mean, what we see is that we have initiatives like Gaia-X and IDS, for example, but also others, where people come together and form consensus about what is needed, which is a great thing because it has created a movement, right? But I think the marginal utility is decreasing with every day that passes by. So what I mean is, we have talked about it for so long, and I think we have reached a certain level where it's okay, and we should probably not stop talking, but really concentrate on implementing stuff. And that is why it's so needed that we have this project, the EDC project, because that basically lets us living up to this, let's say, this idea of rough consensus and running code, because we create something that people can touch and which basically embeds the notion of, let's say, data sovereignty as an enabler for a fair data economy. So that's why it's very needed, let's say, from a life cycle perspective. The other thing that puts pressure, let's say, on all of us is the fact that the markets are now opening up, right? I mean, money has been poured in. There is, let's say, public money, but also industry consortia are forming with a clear and also timely vision to create a data space. And I mean, we need to be able to tell them, look, we have what you need, right? Because otherwise they would go somewhere and start to reinvent the wheel or use something which is not, let's say, conformant to this overall thinking that we share about, let's say, data sovereignty and trust and so on. So, and that's a great thing, I should say, because usually if you look into, let's say, or take your clients or the outside in perspective, that helps you to really get things going. So, and therefore I'm really happy that we have so many user initiatives, so many data ecosystems and data space initiatives popping up all over the place, because that's basically what should drive us, because there is a clear market demand. And talking about, let's say, these user initiatives like Catena-X or the mobility data space or EUNA-X, as I said, I mean, they usually undergo certain stages, like a little bit like a finding or founding also phase, where, let's say, this ecosystem is forming, and usually consensus is reached about, okay, what do we want to achieve together? And by the way, that is an accepted understanding that these ecosystems come together because all the participants have learned that they can only achieve their shared goal if they team up. So no one, be he or she as big as possible, is able to do it on their own, because nobody has all the data needed. So they need to team up. But now they need to be provided with a software component that helps them out, right, with their challenges. And therefore, I think that's basically, in my personal point of view, where the majority of let's say, data space consortia stands. They have understood they need to team up. They have sorted out, let's say, their internal governance. They know what they want to do. They have identified the first wave of use cases and have already embarked into implementing it. But now we need to provide them and equip them with the proper tool which is enterprise ready, which is cloud ready, which is scaling, and that's what we do with the EDC project.
Yeah, thanks, Boris. I think this is we've had some great feedback at the beginning of this session, or just before the session as well, from Marcus and Peter, that there has been a lot of interaction, that there's been a lot of questions, and we're also getting into this hands-on. So we delayed the beginning of the session so that some of the developer sessions could finish. So I think this is really promising around community. I'd like to introduce Uli as the next person, the next question I have. So Uli, from Microsoft's perspective, how is Microsoft supporting industry actors with data space ambitions and implementation?
Well, the first thing is that we are a peer to many in this EDC project. So it's not Microsoft driving this, it's Microsoft is a part of a larger effort. And I think that's super important because, as Boris said, really thinking through a fair data economy also requires a fair approach to how we build these things, so that it's not just one company's vision. It's really coming together of multiple perspectives in a trusted environment that has access to everyone, so that we can really solve the issues and scenarios that power the world at the end of the day, because data does power the world. And I think that's the key thing. We are trying to put some thought leadership into it because we have a lot of experience in this space, but again, we are one of many, which I think is important. And the other piece is EDC as an effort is really a building block. It's a capability that empowers a lot of scenarios. Patrick and Kai will talk a lot about Gaia-X, Catena-X, Iona-X, and others, because from their industry perspective. So think of EDC as a fundamental capability that I believe will become very, very key in a number of scenarios. I would go as far as saying that a modern API in an API economy is going to have a data space as one of its potential capabilities. So you have a REST-based API, you might have events, but then you will have a data space, because any AI-based capabilities, very complex business process collaborations in today's world will require data, and more data than you can pull through an API. So a data space is something that we feel is super important. Again, so from our perspective, getting access to the capability, bringing together a number of people in a common, against a common vision is super critical. The other piece, and Boris already said it, there is a number of environments in this world that where we need to support data sharing. Microsoft Cloud, AWS, Google, VMware, China, and so forth. And while the EDC started in Europe, and obviously we are very focused on European scenarios and values, this is a worldwide initiative. As Boris already shared, we need to think about Americans, we need to think about the Koreans, Japanese, Taiwanese, Chinese, etc., because they're all participating in a global economy. I'm sure Kai will share later that BMW is in a global economy. We can't just simply say this is a piece that only supports one economy. This has to be a foundation that enables us to drive this globally. And so from our perspective, building this on open interfaces, open capabilities, open sourcing it as part of the Eclipse Foundation are all key ingredients to provide that access, so that we can really build these global economies based upon data and data sharing.
Thanks, Uli. I think you've answered my question, and I think the idea is that we just get everybody involved and get the discussion. So what I would like to do is just move on to Kai and Patrick as industry experts, because I think that's what a lot of people would like to hear. Is there anything that you would like to add? So I'll start with Kai first, and then ask Patrick as well to follow. Is there anything that you'd like to add to what Boris and Uli have said? And then I think, just to explain what your visions are for your industry and the use cases. And then also, how the importance of partnerships and driving success. So Kai.
Thanks, Cameron. Quite a lot of questions. Well, I'll just start to add maybe some things to what Uli and Boris said. I can fully support what they've been saying. Maybe just one thing to add. I think we should start a mindshift change from a central platform thinking view to a decentral data sovereignty view, because this also helps maybe smaller participants in the markets to join data exchanges and not only be dependent on the big data platform providers. I think that's one thing, but as Uli said, for us as BMW, it's really important that we don't build up a protectionism. Like a lot of people think that Gaia-X is just the purpose of Gaia-X is to create a European hyperscaler. That's not the way. We want to foster the European principles, yes, but we are not limited to the European continent, as we have business all over the world. So we can't end at the borders at Europe or Germany. So I think that's really important. And what I else would like to add, I think it is really remarkable that we managed to come together as this group to really contribute, even competitors within this group. So I think that's the good basis to build a good start for data exchange. So maybe the second question, what is our vision? I've been responsible at BMW to build up a data ecosystem within the company, and I know with what kind of challenges I've been confronted. So and we've seen that the more business use cases we're doing, the more important it gets to foster data exchange over the frontiers and the borders of our company. So, and not only with other industry partners, but also with public authorities. Why am I saying that? Everyone who's living in Germany knows that we're having a hard job in the digitalization of the public authorities. And I think that this initiative can also help to speed up and boost the digitalization of the authority space. Just think of the authority responsible for the car, how do you call it, car registration. This is a quite non-digital process currently. And I think in this data exchange between car manufacturer, customer, and registration authority, we can definitely improve this process. But I think the main business purpose for BMW is the question of improve our service and product quality by using data out of BMW. So I just give you an example, because we are also participating in the initiative Dataspace Mobility. So just imagine we have a service, or we do have a service taking care of road and safety hazards. So for example, slippery road, ice on the road, and all the stuff. And of course, all BMWs on the road won't cover a very good service quality, because especially on smaller roads, we will need other participants to contribute data. And that's exactly one concrete use case where we use the, I would call it the crowd power of other participants to improve existing digital services. So that's one really good use case, and that's where we're participating in the data space mobility. The second one is, of course, sustainability and social standards are becoming more and more important, not only for BMW, for the whole economy. And I think it's a very interesting use case, as it contains a lot of participants. If you just look CO2 footprint of the supply chain. So all BMWs consist of thousands of different parts. They are coming from first, second, third, fifth, sixth level suppliers. So there's a very complex supply chain, and we have to share data over this whole supply chain. And this is only possible if we first have open data sharing standards, and secondly, even connect networks of networks, because we see that currently some singular networks are established, like Catena-X. We're participating in this as well. But I think we will need to also embrace other networks to have the whole data sharing economy in this. So I think the main success factors are ability to scale, which also means to lower the barriers of the participants with these ecosystems, not only from a technology perspective, but also from a trust and legal perspective, and also giving them the opportunity without having high investments join this ecosystem. And I think that's exactly what EDC is enabling them.
Yeah, thanks, Kai. So we'll move on to Patrick. So Patrick, I think in your industry, maybe you could explain a little bit about the use cases there, and then also build on what Kai was talking about, the network of networks, perhaps also from your perspective, if that's okay.
Absolutely. Thank you, Cameron.
Thank you.
Yeah, I'm going to actually echo quite a lot of what Kai, Uli, and Boris have said. Just coming back on EDC and the role of EDC, we've in Amadeus we've done a lot of work on like our internal infrastructure, looking at data exchange and data mesh concepts, so decentralize the data, as it was said in the past, and I think that's what we are now looking for the domain of travel. To do intercompany and at a much larger scale, and so Dataspace and the EDC is a perfect vector for that. EDC, in my view, I like to think of it as a connector itself, as a kind of entry door to one or several data spaces. So it's really a key component for a data space to run, and I think the design of EDC, the way it's been architectured, the way it's modular and can support possibly one or several data spaces, I think is very good and is very future-proof. And it was also mentioned by Boris and by Uli, the cloud ready to me is very essential here. It has to be a component that is very easy, that is seamless to deploy, seamless to run, that we can, like big IT companies or big players, will have the mean to work with something that requires some hands-on. But the goal, and especially in travel, is to be able to connect many players, not only big players. And for that, I'd like to see in the future, it's still an early project, but a connector that is very like a one-click deployment in the main cloud provider, something that we can easily configure to decide which data do we want to expose, under what condition do we want to expose, on which ecosystem do we want to expose. This really is, I mean, to me, one of the end goal of this project, and more particularly in the domain of travel. So what we are looking at with Gaia-X is connecting many different players in the travel. We see, especially with COVID and a lot of the financial help that big companies have received, like for example airlines, that there's more and more regulations to encourage green travel, and that ends up causing passengers to book possibly a train instead of a flight if it works for that journey, meaning that you end up going A to B by mixing your mode of transportation, and so you have to somehow put that back together. And to me, this is what a data space and what we are looking at solving with Gaia-X, for example, is to bring all those data together so that we can serve and traveler in a way that makes travel seamless again. And yeah, so that's the use cases that we are looking at addressing, amongst many, is, for example, you book a flight with connecting with a train, your flight is delayed, and it's to be able to manage very easily, even though it's two different players, different systems, different company, but you can build services on top that brings all this together. And as Kai said, we obviously in travel need to connect with other ecosystems. Obvious ones are, for example, tourism. Tourism is by definition quite local. So there are many data spaces or many initiatives around data that are regional or like certainly national, but even lower granularity. And connecting that with travel so is a must if we want to make a real end-to-end seamless experience. But in other domains too, for example, at the moment, there's plenty of regulations that pop up every day around COVID, and you need to present many documents, many health certificates to be able to get on a plane. Connecting travel data spaces with health data spaces is what will again allow to make that seamless for the end user. But with this interoperability, you can imagine endless use cases, energy to power more greener travel, to work out the like carbon footprint of a journey, and maybe help travelers to choose, pick one mode of transportation versus the other. So plenty of use cases that once we achieve a large scale deployment of data spaces and interoperability, you can imagine many use cases. So.
Yeah. Maybe Patrick, maybe I can just jump in to add on that what you said currently, because I think it's important even within one data space mobility. We have, of course, totally different industries, like you as a booking provider and we as a car manufacturer. Still, if you look from a customer perspective, he doesn't care because he jumps to the plane, he has his booking, he jumps to a taxi, he changes to his private car, and so on. So to get him through this journey, you have to connect the data dots. And even if you think, I have a very good example, which is already 2 years old, but you can also connect totally different data spaces. For example, we've been asked to provide the wipe data of our wipes, screen wipes, to the agriculture, because that's used for micro weather management, because it's much more accurate than the mechanisms they had. So you connect aggregational data space to mobility space data space just by this example. So I think the new use cases will make use of this domain spanning effects, and I think EDC is a very good starting point to do that.
I think yeah, Kai and Patrick, I think this is really inspiring, because I've been in the travel industry in a previous life, and just the things that you were talking about, Patrick, and then the context of today, there is so many options out there, whether it's transport as a service, where a car manufacturer is looking at the connection, the whole journey. So it's very, very interesting. I would like to briefly now just bring in Sebastian, not briefly, but I'll let you have your time, and then we can just come back and make this session a little bit more, that everyone just starts a discussion. So yeah, maybe you could just introduce IDSA, and that you're providing standardization. So how does IDSA support these projects in data spaces, the existing and the new ones that come up, because I'm sure that there's a lot of participants here that might be thinking, thinking about their own data spaces, or supporting existing data spaces. So maybe you can just introduce your leadership.
Yeah, sure. Thank you so much for having me. So I can connect directly to what has been said before by Patrick and by Kai. So that's our job as IDSA, and that's where we started. So great examples, great use cases. My most beloved example was always about this manufacturing industry, where you can easily, or you are looking for the digital twin in manufacturing, and then you can add the CAD data because you're doing 3D printing, additive manufacturing. And then those guys came up from non-destructive testing. So after you printed a thing once, maybe you don't want to destroy it for testing it, but you have non-destructive testing data, and then you have such a cool digital twin, and that's where the data scientists come up and say, well, I got a cool AI algorithm or whatever, and I can do a great predictive thing. So that's exactly the story that we've been telling for years right now in IDSA. And we are on the one hand side connecting the ones with expertise, with the knowledge to build connectors, for example, like EDC does now, and the ones with a need that want to build such data spaces and use such data spaces. That's basically our job to connect those different things. And so we have a lot of activities to support the adoption and the usage of IDS things, thinking about great use cases, business cases, and really building up such data-driven ecosystems. That's one part of the job. But I think, Cameron, you asked more for the more boring things, so doing something like a standardization activity. So that's what we're doing. We are writing a reference architecture model since a couple of years, starting from existing technologies and thinking, so how can we put those together to let this idea of data spaces grow, where you can easily share data so that people understand. So I can put a policy on my data like you do today in your file system inside your company. So access to my file system is only allowed for this department. And now just think about the next level. Put a usage policy on top of the data. So you may use my data in this context or that context. And this usage policy flows with the data wherever it goes. So this is a basic idea. And then you have to think, so how can you put this into practice? Because when you talk to this about this with people, they say, well, okay, I understand that you can transfer data from A to B, but then you cannot protect it anymore. But then the security specialists come up and say, well, I know how to do this. And that's how we grow a really comprehensive reference architecture model that enables a lot of those functionalities today, based on the content making of our working groups, of our association. So the people that are building technologies, building connectors, join and discuss and come up with a common reference architecture model that describes how those things could be put into practice. So first step. Second thing is then, of course, you have to show, after you come up with the EDC, that it's compliant to IDS. So we do the compliance proof. We can show you, so EDC is IDS compliant or it's not IDS compliant, and it's maintained and managed by the community, by the IDS community. We prove that you're IDS compliant or not. And this opens those ecosystems that you've been discussing before, really. So you don't have to use an EDC at all participants. Of course, I would love to see a lot of participants using EDC, but we're talking about sovereignty. I mean, so you have the free choice, choose the EDC, choose another implementation, or do it on your own. I want to build my own one. I want to enable my company because I have some specific requirements or whatever. And then we can show that you're compliant. And that means you can easily plug together in a data space an EDC connector and your own one, and it will work. You can exchange data, both are parts of this data space. But, and this is a third important aspect of this boring work of IDSA, we need those building blocks, those Lego bricks. Not everyone wants to start on his own like you guys did. So I don't want to put all the risk, all the effort on my own. So let's join forces, let's work together and build open source components. So we are promoting exactly those open source components and supporting you folks to come up with a great and a really great and usable solution. And with that, I can make one final connect maybe to other things that we do. So during the last year, IDSA and some other initiatives, for example, Gaia-X, FireWare, the Big Data Value Association, we joined forces to become the Dataspace Business Alliance. So now we are building one umbrella to answer your question. So what if I have a component and it's IDS compliant? Will it be Gaia-X compliant at the same time? Are there conflicts? Do I have to do additional things? Well, currently we don't know exactly, but we are working on this. So we agreed to join forces and to come up with exactly that, to check, so what does Gaia-X compliance mean? What does IDSA compliance mean? And how can we put both things together? That's what we're working on. So today I don't have the answer yet, but we have the umbrella and we have the plan, we have the project to work on this and to deliver this, to make sure that such cool projects like EDC will really deliver something that serves for data spaces and not only for IDSA or for Gaia-X or something like this.
Thanks, Sebastian. Really appreciate it. I think it's given us a good view. And one of the questions that came in from Jens Müller are there any current ambitions in the EDC to integrate other ongoing standards of Industry 4.0 like AAS?
I think, if I may, this is Boris. I think there was a term that we used and still are using in the Gaia-X community, which is architecture of standards, and that's actually what I still like a lot, because as this famous computer scientist from the Netherlands said, the good things about standards is that you have so many to choose from. You know, this holds true also in our domain. So what we need to do, and I think what Sebastian mentioned, the Dataspace Business Alliance is also an umbrella to make sure that we show how the different standardization initiatives and the different specs fit together. Of course, there are many overlaps, but let's say if I look into the history, for example, of the asset administrative shell, it was in the beginning, and still is, but in the beginning mainly meant to be a semantic information model to describe in an unambiguous semantic way industrial assets. That's what it all was about. But of course, over the years, people rightfully thought about things like, okay, how can we make sure who is allowed to access this data for this digital twin? Which kind of technology will we employ? Is it, let's say, attribute-based or a role-based access control, or should we embark into usage control even? And so there are, let's say, multiple overlaps between AAS, IDS, and also Gaia-X. But it's really, I think, the job of our community to sort this out and make a proposal how things fit together, because it's not a job of the user to do that. If I'm a user, I just want to access a library with code that works, and don't want to bother with these kind of, let's say, compatibility issues and so on and so forth. So to answer this question, if I have a clear industrial scenario, and you know that there are also plans, talks towards a Industry 4.0 data space, if we talk about that, then definitely the use of the asset administrative shell is advisable for sure, in combination with other standards. For example, as I said, the IDS information model, because that tells you, okay, how to specify a data source and usage constraints and these kind of things. But in the end, it will always end up, as I said, as an architecture of standards. And the EDC will be able to also support this, let's call them higher level domain-specific standards like AAS. But it's not our job to define or further develop them, I would say. But this is my perspective on the topic.
Maybe just to add on what Boris was saying, yes, we are in talks driven by Catena-X between EDC and the Industry 4.0 team. And we would be very interested within the use case of circular economy, because there we can really make use of the combination of both. But yes, the answer would be of Jens's question. Yes, we are looking at it.
I am glad to hear that, if I may add my 2 cents on that, because, of course, this is an important thing, the asset administration shell. We've been discussing and aligning it with the IDSA work and the IDS work since years, like Boris already mentioned, because somehow we're talking about different things, but there is a certain overlap. And this is where we have to understand and align things. So we don't come up with a solution that works right now, but what we can do is during the creation time to align and to discuss to make sure that there are no conflicts. So it's at least conflict free. It's still work to align and put it together, for example, in EDC, but it's free of any conflict. And this is an important thing. And that's why we've been discussing for years and shown for the semantic aspect that it works. There are some pitfalls inside, but it will work. And someone can implement it. But also for the security constraints of the asset administration shell, it's implementable and it works. And by the way, an IDS connector, the EDC, will support you in building an asset administration shell, by the way. So halfway gone if you want to build one. So, and this is exactly one important thing. And now ready to shoot. I mean, EDC is a community activity. Let's build this together.
I think the key thing is what Boris already said, but I want to stress it. It's a composable architecture. And I think when you look at AAS, it has a number of layers in it. And part of this is this an XOR proposition, meaning it has to be AAS all the way, or can you effectively compose things in? So I think there is a number of work items we have as a community to really bring those two together, because IDS answers a number of questions that AAS doesn't answer. AAS has very specific purpose against industrial assets that, again, I think they are the leading authority to drive that. But bringing it together, I think, is going to be the key. And so love Kai's initiative that there's already work going on. I think we should just figure out how EDC and the Industry 4 team talk more and figure out how we compose the solution. And I'm sure there are other standards as well, Patrick, maybe in the travel space where we can learn and figure out how we compose solutions.
Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah, and also, if I may, I mean, this is because, I mean, with the EDC, but also in general, Gaia-X and IDS are really focusing on this horizontal data infrastructure layer. So there is no ambition and also no knowledge to specify, let's say, domain-specific features of real-world objects in healthcare, in energy, in smart cities.
Yep.
That needs to be done by that specific communities themselves, because they are the ones that know. However, let's make sure that we all use the same grammar, let's call it like that,
yep,
in order to make things interoperable. But let's say the functional, the business notion of what the things actually mean must come from the vertical communities.
Yeah, thank you, Boris. I think there's a lot of dialogue going on here, and if anybody would like to answer any questions, now is the moment. I've got one question here, and that is, in my company we have a lot of legacy or proprietary systems. Do we need to migrate to new technologies to make it work? Who would, Patrick, Kai, would you, or Boris? Yep, yeah, great.
Happy as well to jump in.
Okay, so
yeah, I'll start
Patrick,
briefly. No, I think it's a very essential point indeed. And if we do want to make this initiative work, I think it needs to respect the existing. So we talked about integrating the EDC into the major cloud players and making it seamless to work and so on. It cannot be that to make it work, you need to embark in major IT transformation. So to me, and that's the spirit of the EDC today, it needs to sit on top of your existing data platform or your existing systems, and then provide an entry door to present the data in a way that is compatible with the data space, that lets you keep control on your data, that lets you understand who you are talking to and who do you share data with. But in my view, at least, I think you need to sit on top and enable the connection without having to force companies to transform to all adopt the same technology and so on and so on. So yeah, that's a very important aspect.
Thank you, Patrick. Boris and Kai, who's first? You've both got your answers. Okay, Boris.
Yeah, I think the situation that we currently see is comparable to 30 years ago, when, let's say, major or the larger companies, almost all of them migrated to something that was by then called ERP, and which was, let's say, a strategic shift in the, well, IT and application architecture of a large corporation. And what we see right now is a similar thing, because now there is a transformation or a migration, well, not migration, but a transformation towards, let's say, cloud-based systems. Why? Because, let's say, all the new innovative scenarios are built between companies and ecosystems, and that requires functionality that we usually do not have in the ERP systems that we use for individual companies. So therefore, I think, let's say, the strategic shift, so to say, indeed is comparable to what we had 30 years ago. And that also brings me to the point that while at that time in the 90s, everybody was requiring, for example, a roles and rights concept and system in these ERP systems. But this was not the most attractive thing, right? I mean, nobody really was buying an ERP system just because of this sophisticated roles and rights concept. It was, let's say, it had to be there by default. And if we think this further, then I think, and assume the idea that much of the new stuff will be created on cloud platforms because it's for the ecosystem and not an individual company, then we would also end up in a situation where we would consider data sovereignty and all related technologies like provenance and tracing of data flows and so on. We will just expect that as a given in 5 or 10 years from now, similar to we expected roles and rights management in ERP as a standard by that time, right? And therefore, yes, to a certain extent, of course, we need to make sure that legacy can be connected to this new world. But if we talk, let's say, about the functionality that is needed for ecosystem scenarios, it will be new functionality anyway. So let's build it in the proper way from the very beginning, right? And that's so why it's so important that that we basically also integrate our thinking of data and cloud sovereignty in the de facto standards that we use on cloud platforms, and that's exactly what we do in the EDC projects. And therefore, really, I'm optimistic and positive that we all together really have the chance to set the cloud standard for data sovereignty with our project.
Okay, just I think Boris mentioned most of that what I would like to say, but I think from a technology perspective, it's easy because you can do your own EDC extension. You can use your existing data catalog. Well, that's not a big deal, but I think which might be challenging is if you have an old monolithic system, you have to change the workflow, the way data is going to be exchanged. And I think that could be a real challenge, maybe more than the sole technology aspects.
Sebastian, you raised your, or Uli, yeah, you raised your hand. Maybe then Sebastian, and then we'll.
Yeah, I think the thing is going to be it's a two-phase effort. I think Boris really explained it very well, which is, look, at the end of the day, new systems will emerge or existing systems will be upgraded, whatever it is, to support these new capabilities. And in the meantime, you will see systems that effectively sit on top of the existing ones. For example, in Microsoft Cloud, we have a ton of data connectors. We have connectors to SAP, we have connectors to other systems, and those connectors, if I have my way, will soon expose data through capabilities we have in various Azure products into the IDS capabilities using the EDC. So I think you will see implementations that effectively build gateways into the existing world, hopefully automatic. And then I think Sebastian mentioned it a number of times before, there are IDS connectors as there are EDC connectors because they're a shared architecture. And so there's going to be built ones that people ship, and then there's people that can't build one themselves because the system might be very old. So there's nobody that's interested to doing it, but it can be done because it's open source. You can effectively leverage capabilities from the projects to see how a connector is being built, what you need to do, and then you can do it. So for me, this two-phase approach is traditional. It's what happens. People first build gateways into existing stuff, and then the existing stuff either gets replaced or gets updated.
Sebastian, I want to just give you the chance to answer or to add to that, but there is also and then I'll just follow with the last question. You might have seen this as well, so feel free to answer that as well as adding your last comments, and then we'll do a final closing session, and then I will hand over to Marcus, who will provide some information on possible next steps. So Sebastian, please. Add your points.
Yeah, just briefly to the question before. So, I mean, technology is just one aspect now, since important things have been said by everyone before about the technologies. Of course, you have to do something depending on what you're using. But Kai also had an important point that I would put a spotlight on. So think about your business. So you will just have to provide the technologies. The business will have to deal with other things, more dynamic supply chains and value chains, distribution, not only inside your garden, also in the value chains and supply chains, and becoming more resilient. So this is where Dataspaces really bring you support, and the business have to think about, so what's my position now in an ecosystem where I'm not in a real chain anymore? And this is the real hard work, I think. Technology, if you're doing not technology, that's the easy one. Second thing, so David question, I love it very much, about harmonization. It will also help in the acceptance with citizens and getting their standards required and so on and so forth, not only B2B. Of course, we have to do it, but we have to bring it down on, can you see it? So that's my smartphone. So it has to be as easy as this, and we have to create awareness, understanding for everyone, like all of you understand. So it's important that I can give consent who may use my data for what purpose, but it has to be, everyone is to be educated, you have to be aware, and you have to bring usability on top of that. And this is the important thing, but I think the core technologies below, I think we have them right here in our hands.
Thanks, Sebastian. There's one last question, and I think we can just extend that. And that is, and I think I'll give this to you, Boris. Is there an institution, Fraunhofer, which can support initiatives to build up local vertical data space and general concept and architecture? Is there any funding for such support available, Digital Europe funds, etc.? That will be our last question, but maybe you can just touch on that.
Yeah, I mean, it's as mentioned earlier, I mean, also forming an ecosystem to a certain extent requires a cultural change, because you really need to engage in this co-opetition mode, which is easy said, but often a bit tougher to do. And usually this starts off with a phase where, well, the ecosystem members need to come together. And in that kind of stages, but also later on when it comes to guardrailing, so to say, the implementation process, a neutral partner is helpful. And Fraunhofer is very good, well positioned to do that, but also others. Mobility Dataspace was mediated, so to say, by Arcatech, which was also a new project for Arcatech. In the Netherlands, we have a similar organization like we are as Fraunhofer in Germany. It's called TNO. So it's also a research organization that does these things, for example, with a smart connected supplier network, also an application and an ecosystem of the IDS idea. So there are multiple organizations out there that try to facilitate these multilateral processes. In terms of funding, we in fact see that lots of our tax-paying euros are poured into these activities, which is good, I think, because it helps to, well, achieve this common piece in all the data space activities. Because in the end, all of them should, let's say, be able should be interoperable and to collaborate across the boundaries of individual data spaces. And this requires a common infrastructure that needs to be there. And I'm a true believer that, let's say, for this, well, common task, that is something where the state or the government or the public has a stake in, and therefore I think it's well invested money for this, and because it helps to get things going and to kickstart these initiatives and make sure that, similar to our road network, our electricity network, our mobile phone network, it's, well, as I said, it's a task of the public domain to make sure these things are there, because we cannot charge the complete burden on one player. That would be also not fair. And therefore, I think it's the right way to engage in these PPP settings. And there are a lot of, let's say, perhaps as a final remark, programs out there on national level, but also on European level where you can apply. And the knowledge how to hand in successful proposals is probably well, it's probably available in organizations like Fraunhofer and TNO and VTT in Finland and others.
Thank you, Boris. I'm afraid I'd love to do let's say a wrap-up summary, but we've run out of time. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to hand over to Marcus, and Marcus is going to, share what's next, how to be involved, and there might be some links. I'll share some of the links that we've got to share. So, Marcus, it's your stage.
Yeah, so thanks, Cameron. Yeah, so basically some last words. So where can I buy the EDC? That was one question raised in the morning. Basically, I want to answer that from the open source perspective. The EDC is completely open source. It's under the umbrella of the Eclipse Foundation, and everyone is able to participate here. That's, I think, a very important topic. And like Babak mentioned already in the chat here, send feature requests to Marcus. So just send me an email, just contact me and write what kind of features you're interested in. But to be honest, preferably just add them on GitHub or directly help to implement them. I think this is more or less the message I want to say here. So how to participate and how to stay on track. Basically, we will have more events like that. That was already outlined in the Peek into the Future session. And up to that point, I have a collection of different links where you can stay up to date. I also link them in the chat right now. So yeah, keep on track and have a look on these kind of links and try to contribute and bring in your thoughts. And since, this is the closing session and we are 1 minute over 5, I want to take the chance to say thank you to all the people that are involved in the planning and execution of this conference. I think this is very important. So our presenters in the morning session, great job. We had the team greatly performing the code walkthrough, and the hands-on session answering a lot of questions and give guidance. Our panel with these great insights we had from practice, from technology, from the standardization perspective. And last but not least, thank you to all the active people in the community and especially the contributors working on the EDC project. So to my impression, it was a great and fruitful event. We had great sessions and could clarify a lot of things and how the EDC fosters data spaces. That was more or less the motto we had, and also how the EDC will leverage IDS and Gaia. So this was also indeed only possible through all your insights. So also thank you to all the audience. A lot of participation that was really great. So I'm really looking forward to jointly work on the topic of data spaces and let us work together to create components and solution for sovereign data exchange. So thanks everyone and bye.
Thank you.